Have you ever thought about taking an MBA but felt like business concepts are just too complicated to understand? Hi everyone, I'm Leny Argentiany from UIII Library. Welcome to UIII Book Review Session, where we turn simple reading into meaningful learning. In this video, I'm going to talk about a very practical and easy to understand book called the Visual MBA. If you ever felt that business concepts are just too complicated, this book might just change your perspective. This book is written by Jason Barron. What I find really interesting about him is how Jason approaches business learning in a very different way. So instead of explaining concepts in a heavy or complicated way, he focuses on making them simple, visual, and easy to understand. And I think that's what this book stands out. Because it doesn't feel like you're reading a textbook. It feels more like you're being guided through the ideas, step by step, in a way that actually makes sense. And that's especially helpful if you're preparing for or going through an MBA journey. The Visual MBA explains key business concepts like marketing, finance, strategy, and operations, but in a very simple and visual way. So instead of long and complicated theories, it uses diagrams and structured ideas to help us understand things much faster. First, business concepts don't have to be complicated. Second, understanding the big picture is more important than memorizing details. And third, visual learning can make complex ideas much easier to understand, especially when you're going through an MBA journey. First, about simplicity. This book doesn't overwhelm you with theory. Instead, it simplifies everything. It shows that business is not about memorizing. It's really about understanding. From what I've seen, people often don't struggle because the concepts are too difficult, but because they are presented in a complicated way. So when we simplify the basics, everything becomes much easier to understand. What I found especially helpful is how it breaks down complex ideas into visuals. Suddenly, concepts like marketing, finance, and strategy feel much more connected. Second, about the big picture. The book encourages us to understand how different parts of business are connected, like marketing, finance, and operations. Often, we learn these areas separately, but in reality, they are always interconnected. And once you start seeing those connections, your understanding becomes much more deeper and more meaningful. And what makes it even more interesting is how we can actually apply these concepts in real life. For example, in marketing, instead of overthinking strategies, we can start with a simple question. Who is your customer? And what do they really need? And in finance, it reminds us that making sales is not enough. We also need to understand our costs and whether we are actually making a profit. Lastly, about visual learning. The use of diagrams really helps us process information faster and remember it better. And in my experience, visual explanations make it much easier to grasp concepts, especially in a fast-paced learning environment like an MBA program. Even in our everyday decisions, this way of thinking helps us become more structured and more aware. And that's when I realized learning business doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be clear and meaningful. Thanks to the book, The Visual MBA by Jason Barron. So the Visual MBA is not just a book that simplifies business concept, it's also a great foundation if you're preparing for or currently going through an MBA journey. Because when you understand the basics, you don't just learn faster, you learn more meaningfully. Thank you for watching UIII Library Book Review Session with me, Leny Argentiany, and I'll see you next time as we go through more parts of this book together, The Visual MBA by Jason Barron. And remember, learning made simple, thinking made meaningful.